Kai, Fluff, Goolie, and Old Blue are assaulting Valenti's criminal headquarters. Fluff just pushed the button of a mystery device, but what will that mystery device do? Stack up the corpses, because all debts are about to be paid in full. The battle of Break My Back comes to a final and bloody end. Welcome to the serialized audiobook, The Reef, written by Scott Sigler and Matt Wallace. Narrated by Scott Sigler. Hello, junkies! Welcome to The Reef, episode number 12. It is a humdinger! This episode is sponsored by GoDaddy.com. Get your own ass a new .com domain for just $4.99 with the code CJCSIG99C. That's CJCSIG99C. We are down to the last two episodes, including this one. But let it be known that this episode is the climax. Episode 13 coming up. Oh, it's a dandy. All of my episodes are dandy, I assure you. But what you are about to hear is a blood-soaked spectacle of ultra-violence. And don't forget the Q&A episode that closes out this book. It'll be episode 14 of this story. Do you have questions or comments about The Reef, about the GFL series, or anything Sigler related? Email those questions to info@emptyset.com before July 15th, 2019, and we will answer your questions or comments on the air. All right! It's time for the battle! Here we go with episode number 12 of The Reef. Dahlia heard another explosion, then another, and another. These sounded smaller than the first, but they were closer, from the main hall right below her feet. The sounds made her jump, snapped her out of the blankness she'd felt after watching a hurrah jab a needle into Omig Valenti's neck. "How can you be alive?" Dahlia asked Goolie. "And—" Her voice trailed off. She couldn't bring herself to ask the question. The hurrah was cuffing the motionless Valenti, who was face down and drooling on his carpet.
"Let me guess what you were going to say,"
Goolie said.
"And are you going to kill me now?"
Dahlia shook her head slightly, stunned by what she'd seen. She'd been alone in the room. Right after changing into this ridiculous outfit, Goolie had just appeared. She hadn't seen him come in, had no idea how he'd gotten in at all. He told her to stay quiet or he'd shoot her. She'd stayed quiet, even when Valenti came in and walked right under the floating hurrah. I was going to ask you if Lash was alive," she said. "But yes, I want to know if you're going to kill me."
"No, you backstabbing human piece of filth, I'm not,"
Goolie said.
"Yes, Lash is alive. Will he kill you? That's the question I'd like to know."
The hurrah floated up, spread his wing flaps so she couldn't help but see the horrible, ragged holes punched through both of them.
"Personally,"
Goolie said,
"I hope the answer to that question is a resounding and bloody yes."
She had felt horrible betraying them. When Kai had left, she'd signaled Gabriel using the small fob he'd given her. Donnie and Whitall had used a key. She'd given Gabriel that as well to slip in through the back door. They'd surprised Goolie, thrown a blanket over him, then beat him until he stopped struggling. Sure, she'd felt like trash, but better to feel like trash than to be dead, which is what she would have been if she'd tipped Goolie off. Gabriel, with that horrible nightmare of a face, had told Dahlia in detail of what he'd do to her if she warned Lash or Goolie. One telling of that tale, and she'd all but thrown the key at him, all but begged him to catch Lash and Goolie and take them away and please, please just leave her alone. "How did you get in here?" she asked the hurrah. "They told me this place is like a fortress."
"Human, there isn't a place in the entire galaxy I can't sneak into. And on this backwater, nothing could be easier."
Gabriel had scared the hell out of her. She wasn't any less afraid now because as bad as that monster frightened her, Lashkari frightened her far more. "So what happens now?" she asked. Goolie floated there, wings undulating slightly.
"Now we wait for the marshal."
Fluff had sobered up. Kai had gone to the Heavy Key's burrow, been somewhat surprised to find Fluff studying a crudely drawn map of the War Lodge. The big sentient had been working on a plan of his own. The Heavy Key had fled a fight. In doing so, he'd lost what little honor he had left. In his newfound sobriety, he'd also come to realize that he'd spent years drunk off his ass while human gangsters had occupied his ancestral home. Kai offered a way to get both things back. This was a sober Fluff, a dangerous Fluff. Kyle North feared no sentient, but he was glad Fluff was on his side. Toulouse's gift for Valenti had been twofold. First, checkers. Apparently, Valenti had used that schmeck to threaten Toulouse's family, and Dirk thought it would be poetic if Checkers was involved in bringing Valenti to justice. Second, Toulouse had given Kai a remote device that could send his proprietary schmeck power plant design into instant overload, cause those engines to go boom. A little insurance against people who stopped making their payments but wouldn't give back the merchandise. Toulouse had built each and every one of those machines, after all. Valenti could reprogram them, but a creator knows secrets the neophyte does not. The trick was, you had to get close to the schmecks for the overload signal to work. As in, within a dozen meters or so. That's where Fluff came in. Kai reached the doors to the War Lodge. The two human guards were as dead gets. Unrecognizable, really. Checkers and the pink mining schmeck were tearing each other apart with what looked like stone-cutting chainsaws. Red, white, pink pieces all over the place. Both machines were still moving, but barely, and they wouldn't be for long. Without a shout or a challenge, Kai calmly stepped into the War Lodge. Blood everywhere. On him, on the table, on the walls. The hall was a cloud of stinging smoke that smelled of ground metal and burning grease. Whitall rose up to all fours, too weak to stand on his rear legs. He heard screams. He heard moans. He heard a roaring voice, too deep to be human or Quith. Home. Something wet on Whittall's left pedipalp. He reached up, pulled it away. Half a bloody human face, bone still beneath it, broken like the shell of a cracked, hard-boiled egg. High sides face. The human's ruined eyes stared out blankly. Whittall flung the mess aside, heard it splat against the floor. Movement to his right. Someone running through the smoke, going up the stairs. Had he just seen Gabriel on those stairs before the mechs blew up? Maybe, but Gabriel wasn't there now. Whoever was going up those stairs didn't matter. There was an invader in the house of Valenti, and Whittall would fix that problem. Whittall finally regained enough strength to stand on two legs, like a proper warrior. He didn't know where his spitter was. Bodies all over the place. Bodies and smoldering bits of mech. In the center of the room, the biggest key he had ever seen had two of his four hands wrapped around Donnie's throat. Donnie's feet kicked at air a good meter off the floor. Whittall charged. Gabriel heard big feet pounding up the stairs above him. Maybe that's what he heard. Everything was too loud, too intense. The pain in his head was like a sun. Hot, steady, constant, and overwhelming. Cool wetness on his face, on his arm. The explosions had thrown him off those stairs, dropped him to the hard floor below. How far had he fallen? 2 meters? 3? He sat up. Sounded like there was a war going on around him. He touched his head. His hand came away bloody. As if his face hadn't taken enough damage already. Gabriel needed a minute to collect himself. He rolled over once, twice, found himself on the mattress under the stairs. There weren't a lot of rooms on the second floor. An empty office, a storeroom, another office that looked unused, and then the bedroom. In the bedroom, Kai found Goolie, Valenti, and Dahlia. Kai stepped in and closed the door. He forced himself not to look at her, to focus on the task at hand. Goolie had made good on his boast. Valenti was face down on the carpet in a puddle of his own drool, hands cuffed behind him. "Shucking hell," Kai said. "I told you to keep him conscious so I could be the one to arrest him."
"And I told you I don't play games with half doses,"
Goolie said.
"He's alive, isn't he?"
Kai knelt, put his fingers against Valenti's neck. "Barely. How did you get in here anyway?"
"Air vent,"
Goolie said.
"Works every time."
Kai was trying to ignore Dahlia, but she screwed that up by not having the common sense to keep her dirty traitor's mouth shut. "What's going on down there, Lash? It sounds like a war." She was scared. That wasn't the question she really wanted to ask. A man's scream rose up from downstairs. "It is a war," he said. "Fluff is getting payback for his ancestors, and for dynamite, and probably anything else he can think of." Kai picked up Valenti, threw the man over his shoulder. "Come on, let's get this piece of trash out of here while we still can." "Lash," Dahlia said, Are you going to arrest me too?" He stared at her. That was closer to the question she wanted to ask. She wanted to substitute the word kill for arrest, but she was probably afraid of the answer. She should be. If she wouldn't ask the real question, he wasn't going to give her the real answer. "Not today," he said. Let her wonder. Whitall flew through the air. He hit the long table, bounced off, crashed to the floor. He slid to a stop against Donnie. Donnie, wide-eyed, face etched with fear. Whitall didn't know much about human anatomy, but human heads weren't supposed to sit at such strange angles. The heavy key had snapped Donnie's neck. Whitall tried to rise. He could not. He was defeated. He was the last of Valenti's guards. The others were dead. The heavy key, so big he could have been a small mount for the REEF stompers. Fluff was his name, Whitall finally remembered. Whitall had hit the big invader at least 4 times with spitters. Fluff bled for maybe 24 wounds. Black ichor ran in rivulets down his pebbled skin, but clearly none of the rounds had done anything other than lodge in the beast's thick layers of fat. The heavy key shuffled to the long slate table. He locked all 4 hands down on one end and lifted. Fat encased arms, the size of industrial core samples, jiggled with the strain of the muscles beneath. 6 fatty legs spread wide, also trembling with the effort. The table was 10 meters long. Whitall saw the free end rise up, wondered at the engineering involved that kept the thick plank of slate from snapping in the middle. The heavy key then, somehow, rotated the table so that the legs were sticking up and the blood-smeared flat top was facing down. Whitall hoped that his effort had brought his new Shamakath enough time to get away. If so, then Whitall knew his own life had, finally, served its purpose. Fluff turned slightly, slowly, under the burden. Whitall looked up as the end of the table swung into position above him. From under the stairs, Gabriel watched the heavy key lift the table, raise it, then turn toward Whitall. Gabriel felt no shame in hiding while the rest of Valenti's goons had been smashed to pulp. Fighting that monster head-on was suicide. Stupid spitters. They worked fine against a normal-sized sentient, but to that thing, they were little more than bug bites. Whitall weakly raised one petty palp arm. Fluff brought the table down fast. The thick plank of slate smashed that arm, then smashed Whitall, crushing the warrior's carapace so hard and so flat that blood shot out as if a fly swatter had pulverized a big, juicy, fluid-engorged insect. The heavy key roared in victory, pushing out so much air and volume that his vibrating vocal tubes stood straight up. Easily a ton of muscle, fat, and pebbled skin, bleeding from a dozen small wounds. Absolutely terrifying. And Fluff was standing between Gabriel and the door. Gabriel stayed very still. Fluff shambled to the beer trough. Some of the heavy key's legs weren't working that well, but he managed all the same. The heavy key tipped the trough, sending a wave of beer across the floor. Beer that splashed up against corpses, washed away gore, carried smashed bits of Whitall to bounce off the wall. The heavy key righted the trough. Then he picked up the nearest deceased gang member, held the body over the trough, and ripped off an arm. Blood poured into the trough. After Fluff drained a second body, Gabriel couldn't deny what he was watching. This monster was going to fill up the trough with sentient blood, including Gabriel's, unless he got out of there or found a freaking cannon to take this thing out. Above the hearth, the giant shotgun, a memento of the Flathead Gang's past glory. The men had said it still worked, even said it was loaded. 1 round in the breech, 4 more, each the size of his forearm, lined up on the mantel. A sickening sound of ripping flesh. A third body torn to pieces, red streams pouring into the trough. Then a 4th. Then a 5th. Gabriel made his decision. He sprinted out from hiding, raced to the fireplace. Fluff saw him moving, of course, because Key saw everything around them. The heavy key waddled toward Gabriel, intent on adding Gabriel's blood to that horrendous soup. Gabriel reached the hearth. He yanked the cannon-sized shotgun off the wall and cracked it open. A fist-sized circle of metal showed in the breech. He snapped the breech closed, turned. The mammoth key was coming right at him, intent on murder. A part of Gabriel knew the huge shotgun was meant to be fired from a sturdy mount, not from the shoulder, but he didn't let that get in the way of staying alive. He pulled the huge stock to his shoulder, aimed the gaping barrel at the five-eyed horror, and pulled the trigger. The blast spun him backward. The gun flew from his hands. Acrid smoke filled his nose and mouth, stabbed at his eyes. All sound went away, save for a faint ringing, as if the world's volume had been dialed down to 1 and then the speaker film corrupted. No, there was another sound, faint and deep. Gabriel looked at Fluff. The spray of metal had shredded the key's upper left arm, torn the lower left clean off along with a ragged chunk of shoulder. Black blood sprayed. Vocal tubes flared, wavered in all directions. The heavy key wasn't dead yet, but it wouldn't be long. Gabriel saw the shotgun on the floor, where it had left a skid trail through beer and blood. He reached for it. Chainsaw pain raged through his shoulder. Broken collarbone? Probably. He could reload it one-handed on the floor. With his good arm, Gabriel reached up to the stone mantel, grabbed one of the thick rounds, a hand on the back of his head, shoving. His face smashed into the stone mantel. Teeth snapped. Lips tore. He found himself on his back, spitting blood. "I'll help Fluff," a woman's voice. "Stay back," a man said. "You can't help him. He might kill you by accident." That first voice, that Dahlia woman, the woman Gabriel had wanted dead. And the second voice, Lash Kari, also known as Marshall North, the man Gabriel had thought was dead. A hand on his wrist. Gabriel was yanked up and dragged. Kai wished there was something he could do. There wasn't. He wished he would have been just a few seconds faster. Maybe he could have reached Gabriel in time. Kai knew key anatomy better than most, better even than many doctors. Kai had watched Key die in the octagon, because Kai had been the one to kill them. Even if there was a doctor that could help Fluff's lethal wound, that doctor would never make it in time. The heavy Key had only minutes to live. All Kai could do for Fluff was let him finish the job. Let him go to the great beyond, not only with honor and tact, but also the satisfaction of total revenge. The heavy Key roared in pain. A sentient that big, even a random move left or right could crush someone. "Fluff, calm down," Kai shouted. "Calm down!" His words hit home. The heavy Key stopped thrashing. Black Eyes regained that air of focus, locked in on Kai and what Kai was holding. Gabriel. Kai threw Gabriel toward Fluff. Gabriel's limp body hit the floor, bounced once, stopped. Kai took a step back, stood with Dahlia on his right side, Goolie floating at his left. "Listen to me carefully," Kai said, hoping desperately that Fluff understood far more English than he could speak. "I've seen wounds like yours before. You are dead. If you want that bastard to pay for Dynamite's death, do it now." Fluff's head tilted down. Malevolent, black eyes stared at the still conscious Gabriel, who stared straight back at the bleeding, gore-speckled heavy Key. "Let me go," Gabriel said, his voice as soft as the punt gun had been loud. "Let me go." Fluff reached down with his lower right arm. 2 fingers and a thumb, each the size of a human baby's leg, wrapped around Gabriel's head. Fluff lifted him up. Gabriel must have found a hidden reserve of strength. He kicked, he clawed, he punched. None of it made any difference.
"Lash,"
Goolie said,
"you said I'd get to kill Gabriel."
The hurrah was trying to sound angry. He sounded instead like Kai and Dahlia felt, stunned at the savagery, at the mangled bodies and demolished schmecks. Kai gestured to the shambling mountain of flesh. "You want to stop him? Be my guest." Still holding Gabriel, Fluff laboriously walked the 3 meters to the trough, leaving a wide, solid trail of wet black behind him.
I think I'll let it ride,"
Goolie said. The heavy Key held Gabriel, the desperately fighting Gabriel, the uselessly fighting Gabriel, over the trough. "There was beer in that trough," Dahlia said, her voice small and quiet. "That's not beer anymore." She was right. The trough was half filled with thick, bright red fluid. No one needed to ask what it was. Gabriel's kicking and clawing lost intensity, but he fought on. Fluff didn't seem to notice.
"Golly,"
the heavy Key said, weak vocal tubes forcing out the words.
"Thank you. House of Ancestors is yours."
With that, Fluff shoved Gabriel's head into the blood, used his free hands to steady the trough against the human's renewed struggles. The blood was just deep enough to cover Gabriel's face. Gabriel kicked and clawed, fought with everything he had left, but Fluff's arm remained rock steady. Blood splashed. Gabriel punched at the arm, slapped at the blood, gripped the sides of the trough, and tried to push back up. None of it changed a thing. His motion slowed, weakened, then stopped. Fluff's 6 legs gave out. Energy fully depleted, life almost gone, Fluff's final act was to lay his body over the trough, perhaps just to make sure Gabriel would drown. Kai, Goolie, and Dahlia stood there, speechless. They had all seen horrible things in their time, all been exposed to various types of savagery. But this slaughterhouse was on another level entirely. That was horrible, Dahlia said, finally, her voice cracking, wavering. Kai picked up the blood-smeared punt gun. He carefully placed it back on the bracket above the hearth. He then lifted his badge from the peg upon which it hung. He put the chain over his neck, wiped a speck of blood off the shiny brass. Marshal Kyle North turned to face his friends. His chest swelled with pride. "Woman, you're in break my back," he said. "That wasn't horrible. That's what we call justice." That was episode number 12 of The Reef. Justice has come to break my back. Justice in the fashion of Kyle the Heretic North. Oh, excuse me, Marshal North. But what happens now? Will the Reef Marshals take this result? Will Greedock the Splithead come for Kai? What's going to happen with Dahlia? Who knows? Find out next week on The Reef. Episode number 13, the final episode of the story. Until then, we will talk to you all real soon. You have been listening to The Reef, a Galactic Football League novella. Written by Scott Sigler and Matt Wallace. Narrated by Scott Sigler. Audiobook directed by AB Kovacs and engineered by Steve Riekeberg. Copyright 2019 by Empty Set Entertainment. All rights reserved. Theme music is by the band Amps and Volts.